The great spire of Othvalor groaned under the sonic pressure of the bombardment, a sound like the tectonic grinding of continents that vibrated through the crystalline floor of the High Synod, shaking the very foundations of the Ethelgardian civilization. High Archon Vralik adjusted his ceremonial mantle, the iridescent scales of his neck flushing a deep, bruised purple, a physiological betrayal of the terror he fought to suppress. He stood at the center of the obsidian amphitheater, a vast, domed chamber that had hosted the deliberations of his people for 10,000 cycles, but now felt like a tomb closing in. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the pheromonal distress of the 300 counselors seated in the rising tiers of the auditorium. Above them, the holographic dome that usually displayed the serene, stardusted arm of the galaxy was now a chaotic smear of crimson tactical warnings and fracturing shield integrity reports. The atmosphere was not merely tense. It was heavy with the specific, suffocating gravity of extinction. Vralik looked into the eyes of his peers, creatures of grace and intellect, their slender, multi-jointed limbs and tall, crane-like necks designed for the navigation of high-gravity archives, not the brutal arithmetic of war, and saw the reflection of his own resignation. "The outer perimeter has collapsed," Counselor Scythe announced, his voice a series of clicking chitter sounds amplified by the acoustic architecture of the room, though the translator in Vralik's auditory receptor smoothed it into the melodic tones of high Gothic Ethelgardian. Scythe was the Minister of Defense, a title that had become increasingly ironic over the last solar cycle. "The Kravet armadas have bypassed the subspace buoys. They are not decelerating for orbital insertion. They are initiating atmospheric entry at relativistic speeds. They intend to burn the atmosphere before they even land." A murmur of horror rippled through the assembly, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. Vralik gripped the podium, his three-fingered hands trembling slightly. The Kravet were a plague of locusts made of biosteel and hatred, a species that did not conquer but consumed. They stripped worlds of their carbon, their water, and their history, leaving behind only barren rock and silence. The Ethelgardians, the librarians of the sector, the keepers of the deep archives, had nothing to offer such a beast but their flesh. They had tried diplomacy. They had offered trade routes. They had offered technology. The Kravet had answered only with plasma fire. "Is there no response from the galactic core?" asked Counselor Alara, her voice soft, trembling with a fragility that cut through the room's tension. She was the keeper of the menagerie, a position of low political standing but high cultural significance. She was a scholar of xenobiology, a gentle soul who had spent her life nurturing the strange and broken things the Ethelgardian explorers found in the drift. "The Federation, the merchant guilds, anyone." Scythe let out a harsh, rasping exhalation. "The core is silent, Alara. They have quarantined the sector. They watch us burn so that the sparks do not catch on their own robes. We are alone. The shielding grid will fail in less than one standard rotation. After that, the fire." Vralik closed his inner eyelids, shutting out the red glare of the tactical map. He thought of the archives beneath their feet, millions of years of art, philosophy, music, the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 dead races preserved by the Ethelgardians. All of it would be ash. But it was not just the books that haunted him. It was the futility of their pacifism. They had believed that intellect was a shield, that culture was armor. They were wrong. The universe was a dark forest, and they were holding a lantern, announcing their position to the predators. "We must initiate the protocol of silence," Vralik said, his voice gaining a sudden, grim strength. The chamber went deathly quiet. The protocol was the final measure, the mass scuttling of their own data, the detonation of the Spire's fusion core to vaporize the city and its inhabitants instantly, sparing them the torture of the Kravet harvest. "We shall not give them the satisfaction of our screams. We shall not let them consume our history." "Wait," Alara stepped forward, descending the floating dais from her sector. Her movements were uncharacteristically sharp, driven by a desperate thought. There is one option we have not explored, one variable we have kept isolated." Vralik opened his eyes, staring down at her. "We have exhausted every fleet, every mercenary contract, every weapon in the armory, Alara. What variable could possibly remain?" "The remnant," she whispered. The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. A ripple of confusion moved through the council. "The specimen?" Scythe scoffed, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "The soft-flesh creature in the stasis garden, the primitive. You waste our final moments with talk of your pets, Keeper." "He is not a pet," Alara said, her voice rising. "He is something else. We found him drifting in the wreckage of a vessel unlike any design in our database. He has been with us for 40 cycles. We studied him. We thought him simple because he does not speak our language, because he possesses no natural armor, no psionic ability. But we were wrong to underestimate the context of his existence. He is a singular biological entity, Vralik said, his tone gentle but dismissive. He is one creature, Alara. Even if he were a warrior of legend, he is one. The cravat number in the billions. What can one biped do against the swarm? He has been waiting, Alara insisted. I have watched him. Since the bombardment began, since the first tremor shook the garden, he has changed. He stopped his pacing. He stopped his consumption of nutrients. He stands by the glass of his enclosure, looking up, not with fear, Archon, with expectation, and he gave me this. Alara reached into the folds of her ceremonial robes and produced a small, metallic object. It was crude, blocky, made of a dense, heavy alloy that absorbed the ambient light rather than reflecting it. It hummed with a low, subaudible frequency that made Vralik's teeth ache. He pressed it into my palm this morning, Alara continued. He spoke a word. The translator struggled with it, but it deciphered the intent. The word was marker. Scythe stepped down, looming over Alara. A distress beacon? From a primitive? Even if it transmits, who would answer? His ship was a wreck drifting from the void between galaxies. His people are dead, Alara, or they are so far away that their light has not yet reached us. Or they are closer than we think, Alara challenged. We saved him. We pulled him from the cold. We healed his broken body. We gave him a home when we could have dissected him. We showed him mercy. If there is even a fraction of a chance that his kind still exists, do we not owe it to ourselves to let him call them? Vralik looked at the device. It was ugly, utilitarian, scarred by the vacuum of space. It looked like a weapon, not a communication device. It looked like a brick thrown through a window. The shields are at 18%, the automated system announced, its voice devoid of emotion. Impact imminent in Sector 4. Vralik sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. What do we have to lose, Scythe? If it is a beacon, let it ring. If it summons nothing, we die. If it summons monsters, well, the monsters are already at the door. He nodded to Alara. Take it to the transmission spire, link it to the hypercom array, let the remnants speak. Alara did not hesitate. She turned and ran, her robes flowing behind her, exiting the High Synod and rushing toward the transit tubes. Vralik watched her go, feeling a strange tightening in his chest. It was not hope. Hope was a cruelty in these times. It was curiosity. He wanted to know before the end what the soft-fleshed creature had to say to the void. The Garden of Stasis was a marvel of Ethelgardian engineering, a biosphere located deep within the lower quadrants of the city, shielded by layers of transparent aluminum and energy fields. It mimicked the natural environments of a dozen worlds, preserving rare species from planets that had long since burned out or been devoured. In the center of the human's enclosure, the environment was temperate, filled with green synthesized flora and a simulated yellow sunlight. Alara burst into the observation deck, her breathing ragged. She keyed the sequence to lower the containment wall. The barrier dissolved. The human stood in the center of the habitat. He was taller than an Ethelgardian but denser, his skeletal structure thick, his musculature compact. He had no carapace, only soft, pale skin that flushed with blood and a mane of silver-gray hair that indicated his age. He wore simple tunics provided by the fabricators, but he wore them with a strange dignity. He was looking at the ceiling, watching the distant flashes of the orbital battle through the skylight. He turned as Alara entered. His eyes were binocular, forward-facing, predator eyes, Alara had noted in her first report, but they were a striking, calm blue. He did not flinch at the sound of the explosions rocking the foundation. Elias, Alara said, using the sound name he had tapped out on the glass years ago. She held up the device. I have authorization, we will send the signal, but you must tell me. Who receives it? Who is out there? The human Elias looked at the device, then at Alara. His face, usually unreadable to her species, softened. He reached out, his five-fingered hand encompassing hers, closing her fingers over the metal brick. His skin was warm, radiating a heat that always surprised her. Not who, Elias said. His voice was gravel, a low rumble that resonated in his chest. He spoke the trade tongue of the Ethelgardians haltingly, but with purpose. Family. Alara led him out of the garden. They moved through the trembling corridors of the spire, dodging falling debris and panicked citizens. The city was dying. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the red emergency strobes. The screams of the populace were becoming audible now, a chorus of terror rising from the lower levels. The Cravat drop pods were landing. They reached the transmission spire, a narrow needle of technology piercing the sky above the council chambers. The wind howled here, carrying the smoke of burning districts. Above them, the sky was a nightmare. The Cravat ships were massive, biological horrors, resembling flayed muscle and bone, dripping with acidic coolant. They swarmed the city's shield like maggots on a wound. Elias walked to the console. He did not look like a refugee anymore. He moved with the precision of a technician. He took the device from Alara and slotted it into the universal port. He bypassed the Ethel Guardian encryptions with a series of manual inputs that were too fast for Alara to follow. He wasn't guessing. He understood the interface. He had always understood it. "You knew," Alara whispered, realizing the truth. "You learned our systems. You learned our language better than you let on. Why?" Elias paused, his hand hovering over the activation key. He looked at her, and for the first time, Alara saw the immense weight of the years in his eyes. "To see if you were worth it," he said. "The galaxy is cruel, Alara, my people. We have learned to be careful. We do not save everyone. Some fires must burn themselves out. But you saved me. You did not ask for my technology. You did not torture me for coordinates. You fed me. You gave me a garden. You are good." He pressed the key. The device didn't emit a radio wave. It didn't send a laser pulse. It screamed. It was a psychic and digital shockwave that bypassed the sensors and hit the mind. Every screen in the room went black. Every Ethel Guardian felt a sudden, sharp pressure in the base of their skull. The Cravat ships overhead hesitated, their biological systems twitching as the signal tore through their organic networks. It was not a distress call. It was a ping, a location tag. "How long?" Alara asked, terrifyingly aware of how exposed they were. The shield overhead was buckling. A Cravat dreadnought was descending directly above the spire, its maw opening to unleash a torrent of plasma. Elias looked at his wrist, where a piece of old, analog technology ticked away seconds. "They are not traveling," he said calmly. "They are already here, waiting for the door to open." The sky shattered. It did not break from the outside in. It tore open from the inside out. Space itself seemed to fold, turning inside out in a geometrically impossible display of physics. Above the burning city, eclipsing the Cravat dreadnoughts, a shadow materialized. It was not a ship. It was a monolith, a slab of matte black metal, featureless and absolute, 5 kilometers long and hanging in the air with zero propulsion exhaust. It defied gravity not by fighting it, but by ignoring it. No lights, no windows, no visible weapons, just a rectangular void in the universe. Then the silence broke. A voice, amplified not by speakers, but by the vibration of the air molecules themselves, boomed across the entire planet. It spoke in Ethel Guardian, perfect, high dialect, devoid of accent. "Stand down." The Cravat, driven by instinct and bloodlust, did not stand down. The dreadnought above the spire fired. A beam of concentrated plasma, hot enough to core the planet, slammed into the black monolith. The beam didn't reflect, it didn't explode, it simply stopped. The black surface absorbed the energy, drinking it in without a shimmer. Elias smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Strike one. The monolith responded. It did not fire a laser. A section of the hull shifted, revealing a bank of emitters that looked like tuning forks. A pulse of distortion rippled out. It hit the Cravat dreadnought. The biological ship didn't blow up. It unraveled. The molecular bonds holding its armor together simply ceased to exist. In silence, the massive vessel turned to dust, dissolving into a cloud of component atoms that drifted harmlessly away on the wind. The entire battlefield froze. The remaining Cravat ships, thousands of them, halted their descent. The Ethel Guardians, huddled in their bunkers, looked up in disbelief. "They are the Saltaran remnant," Elias said softly to Alara. "They do not fight wars, Alara, they end them." From the monolith, smaller vessels detached. They were sleek, angular, aggressive designs, gunships, interceptors, dropships. They descended upon the city with impossible speed. But they didn't fire at the Cravat troops on the ground. They dropped barriers, prisms of hard light that encased the invaders, trapping them in stasis fields. In the High Synod, the holographic map changed. The red markers were turning blue, 1 by 1, then 10 by 10, then hundreds by hundreds. The human fleet wasn't just over the capital. They were over every major city on the planet within seconds. It was a synchronized, global intervention. A beam of light, solid and shimmering, struck the platform of the transmission spire. Alara flinched, but Elias stepped into it. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "The Admiral will want to speak to the Council." Alara took his hand. The world dissolved in a flash of white teleportation, a technology the Ethel Guardians had theorized but never achieved, and reassembled instantly. They were standing on the bridge of the monolith. The bridge was a cavern of sensory data. Humans, dozens of them, wearing dark, uniformed armor with no insignias, moved with efficient, quiet purpose. There were no shouting officers, no panic. It was the calm of absolute competence. The walls were screens showing the tactical disassembly of the Cravat Armada. In the center of the room stood a woman. She was older, her hair white and cropped short, her face a map of scars and stern authority. She wore a heavy coat with a magnetic collar. She turned as Elias and Alara materialized. She looked at Elias, and her hard expression broke for a fraction of a second. "Traveler," she nodded. "Admiral," Elias replied, inclining his head. The Admiral turned her gaze to Alara. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and assessing. She did not look at Alara like a specimen, she looked at her like a counterpart. "I am Admiral Vance of the Terran Ascendancy," she said. Her voice was the same one that had boomed over the city. "You are Alara of the Ethel Guard." I am," Alara stammered, overwhelmed by the sterile power of the ship. You destroyed the Cravat." "We neutralized them," Vance corrected. "They are in containment. We will deport them to a resource bore system in the Outer Rim where they can learn the value of agriculture and diplomacy, or they can starve. We do not practice genocide, Counselor. We practice correction." She gestured to the main screen. The Cravat fleet was in retreat, fleeing the system at maximum warp. The Terran ships were not pursuing. "Why?" Alara asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you come for him?" She pointed to Elias. "Yes," Vance said, "and no." She walked closer, towering over the slender alien. "Elias was a probe, a test. We have been watching this sector for a long time, Alara. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have seen cruelty and indifference. We have seen the Cravat eat worlds while the galactic core watched and did nothing." Vance paused, looking at the display where the Ethel Guardian planet spun, scarred but whole. "We possess power that you cannot comprehend," Vance said quietly. "We have unlocked the secrets of the vacuum energy. We can move stars. We can build Dyson spheres, but with that power comes a terrible danger. If we intervene, we become gods, and we do not want to be gods. We want to be neighbors, but we cannot be neighbors with those who would kill a helpless stranger." She placed a hand on Elias' shoulder. "We left Elias in the wreck. He volunteered. He drifted for years, most species he encountered. They ignored him, or they tried to enslave him. The Cravat would have eaten him. But you, the Ethel Guardians, you found a dying alien in a broken ship. You had nothing to gain. You were losing a war. You had limited resources. And yet you took him in. You healed him. You gave him a garden." The Admiral looked around the bridge, at the crew who were watching Alara with respect. "That act of mercy," Vance said, "saved your civilization. It proved to us that you possess the one resource in the universe that is truly scarce: empathy." "We are not warriors," Alara whispered. "We are weak." "You are not weak," Elias interjected, stepping forward. "You held the line against the darkness with books and shields. You preserved the history of the dead. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing I have ever seen." Admiral Vance nodded. "The war is over, Alara. The Cravat are done. The Terran Ascendancy is establishing a protectorate over this sector. We will rebuild your cities, we will upgrade your shields, and we will share our archives with yours." She smiled, a rare, dry expression. "I hear you have a very impressive library. My engineers are dying to read your history." Alara felt tears, cool and viscous, sliding down her face. We would be honored." "But there is something else," Vance said, her tone shifting, becoming darker, more serious. "The Cravat were not just expanding, they were running." The mood on the bridge shifted instantly. The calm victory evaporated, replaced by the tension of the unknown. "Running?" Alara asked. "From what?" Vance tapped a command on the console. The main screen changed. It showed the galaxy, then zoomed out to the intergalactic void. There was a darkness there, a shadow moving against the backdrop of distant galaxies. "We call it the Great Filter," Vance said. "It is what destroyed our homeworld, Earth, 10,000 years ago. It is why we live on ships. It is why we are scattered." It is a wave of anti-life, a machine intelligence from the dark space that seeks to organize all matter into static data. Alara stared at the screen. The scale of the threat was beyond comprehension. We defeated its vanguard, Vance continued. But the main body is coming. We have been gathering allies, not soldiers. We have enough guns. We need minds. We need cultures that value life, memory, and preservation. We need the Ethel Guardians. She looked at Alara with intense gravity. We saved you today, Alara, but we did it because tomorrow we are going to need you to save us. We need your archives. We need your ability to remember. Because when the filter comes, it tries to erase history. And you are the memory of the galaxy. The revelation struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. The humans, these giants of steel and energy, these destroyers of fleets, were afraid. They were lonely. They were gathering the few lights left in the universe to stand against the coming night. Elias stepped up beside Alara. "We are the sword," he said softly. "But a sword is useless without a hand to guide it. You are the hand, Alara. You are the heart." The bridge was silent. The only sound was the hum of the engines and the distant, rhythmic breathing of the human crew. Alara straightened her spine. She thought of Vralik, of the council, of the millions of scholars hiding in the dark. She thought of the single human in the garden and the simple act of kindness that had just rewritten the destiny of her people. "Then let us begin," Alara said, her voice finding a new strength, a steel that matched the humans around her. "The High Synod must be convened. We have much work to do, and I believe I have some books you should read." Admiral Vance nodded, satisfied. "Set course for the planetary capital, landing party prepare for diplomatic contact, and get the ambassador a uniform." She gestured to Elias. "He's been in pajamas for 40 years. As the massive ship descended through the clouds of Ethelgard, the fires of the war were already dying out. The smoke cleared, revealing the twin suns rising over the horizon. It was a new day. A terrifying, uncertain, magnificent day. The lonely remnant had returned, not just to save a single life, but to unite the survivors. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to recruit. And in the face of the encroaching dark, the galaxy would finally learn that the strongest weapon was not a laser, or a bomb, or a fleet. It was a hand, reached out in the darkness, pulling a stranger from the wreckage. The diplomatic shuttle touched down on the shattered landing pad of the High Synod. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, steam curling into the cool morning air. High Archon Vralik stood waiting, surrounded by the remnants of the council. They were covered in dust, their ceremonial robes torn, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation. They watched the human soldiers secure the perimeter, armored giants who moved with uncanny silence, their weapons lowered but ready. Then Alara emerged. She walked tall, flanked by Elias, who now wore the crisp, gray uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Behind them came Admiral Vance. Vralik stepped forward, his mandibles quivering. He looked at the massive black ship hovering silently above the city, casting a shadow that covered the entire district. He looked at the Cravat wreckage burning in the distance. Is it over?" Vralik asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elias stepped forward. He bowed low, a gesture of deep respect in Ethelgardian culture. "The siege is over, High Archon," Elias said in perfect High Gothic, his voice amplified by his suit. "But the work has just begun." Vance stopped beside him. She looked at Vralik, then at the ruins of the library spire nearby. She saw the books scattered in the rubble, the data crystals crushed underfoot. She knelt, her armored knee crunching into the debris, and picked up a single, fractured data shard. She dusted it off with a reverence that shocked the Ethel Guardians. She stood and held it out to Vralik. "We lost our history once," Vance said, her voice rough with emotion. "We forgot who we were. We became monsters for a time because we had no memory of being anything else. We clawed our way back to humanity, but the scars remain. We will not let that happen to you." Vralik took the shard. He looked at the human admiral, this predator who had chosen to be a guardian. He understood then. The story of the universe was not a circle of violence. It was a spiral. It moved upward, slowly, painfully, pushed by those willing to save the things that could not save themselves. "Welcome to Ethelgard," Vralik said, bowing his head. "Welcome home, friends." High above, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the sensing range of the Council, the Terran fleet began to deploy construction drones. Thousands of them. They weren't just repairing the shields. They were building a lattice, a network of sensors and relays that would span the sector. On the bridge of the flagship, a sensor officer watched a red blip on the long-range scanners. It was far away, millions of light years, but it was moving. The great filter, the silence. Target marked, the officer whispered. Estimated arrival 100 years. The officer looked down at the planet below, where the Ethel Guardians and humans were shaking hands, beginning the exchange of data that would jumpstart the Ethel Guardian technology by a millennium. Take your time, the officer murmured to the darkness on the screen. We'll be ready. The camera pans up from the handshake, up past the ruined spires now swarming with repair drones, up past the black monoliths of the human fleet, past the moons of Ethelgard and into the sea of stars. The music swells, a blend of Ethel Guardian chimes and deep, resonant human cellos, a harmony of two species that should have been strangers but were now kin. The universe was vast and dark and full of terrors, but for the first time in an age it was not lonely. Fade to black. Deep space, Sector 77B, the wreckage of the Cravat Armada. The silence of the void was absolute, save for the dying sparks of the Cravat command ship. Twisting pieces of biological hull drifted aimlessly. Inside the shattered bridge of the Cravat flagship, a single emergency stasis pod flickered with failing power. Inside, the Cravat warlord, broken and freezing, watched the sensor logs of the battle. He replayed the footage of the human arrival. He watched the beam hit the monolith and vanish. He watched his fleet turn to dust. He didn't understand the physics, he didn't understand the weapon, but he understood the message. The humans hadn't killed them all, they had left survivors. Why? A text transmission scrolled across his failing console. It was a broadcast from the human fleet, sent on an open frequency to all Cravat life pods. Mercy is not weakness. Mercy is the confidence of the superior power. Do not mistake our restraint for hesitation. If you return, we will not be gentle a second time. Go, tell the others, the garden is under protection. The warlord shivered, his mandibles clicking against the glass of his pod. He reached for the navigation controls, his clawed hands shaking. He punched in the coordinates for the Cravat homeworld. He had to warn the Hive. He had to tell them that the galaxy had changed. There were no longer just prey and predators. There were gardeners, and they had brought weed-whackers of apocalyptic proportion. The pod fired its thrusters, a tiny streak of light disappearing into the dark, carrying the most dangerous contagion a warmongering empire could ever catch: fear. The archives of Ethelgard, 1 year later. Elias sat on a bench in the restored Garden of Stasis. It wasn't a cage anymore. The glass walls were gone. It was just a park now, open to the air of the city. Ethelgardian children, their shells soft and pastel-colored, played near the fountain. They stopped to look at him, the strange, soft-skinned giant, and he smiled and waved. They giggled and waved back. Alara sat beside him. She was reading a datapad, a device of human manufacture. "This Shakespeare," she said, tilting her head. "He is very dramatic, a lot of unnecessary conflict. Why didn't Romeo simply communicate his intentions clearly to the Capulet patriarch?" Elias laughed, a sound that rumbled like distant thunder. "Because, Alara, humans are messy. We are emotional. We make mistakes. That is why we need you, to help us make sense of the drama." Alara looked at him. "And you, do you miss it, the drifting, the silence?" Elias looked up at the sky. A Terran cruiser was docked at the orbital elevator, its silhouette stark against the sun's. "I was lonely for 40 years, Elias said. "I forgot the sound of a human voice, but I learned something here. I learned that you don't need to be the same species to be family." He pointed to a group of Terran engineers arguing good-naturedly with a team of Ethelgardian architects over the blueprints for a new fusion reactor. They were using hand gestures, translator devices, and drawings in the dirt. They were frustrated, loud, and utterly engaged. "Look at them," Elias said. "We bring the fire, you bring the instructions. It's a good trade." Alara smiled. "A good trade," she agreed. She looked at the sky, where the invisible shield of the Terran Protectorate hummed, safe and secure. She knew the darkness was out there. She knew the great filter was coming. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the future. Because they weren't just facing it, they were riding it together. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees from Earth, planted in Ethelgardian soil. Their roots were tangling together, deep underground, inseparable. Elias closed his eyes, listening to the wind. "Humanity returned," he whispered to himself, and we are never leaving again. End.